specialist, I would say, Professor Enamul Haque. He will talk about future of environmental valuation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sakib, for inviting me to this gathering. It's something quite new, although and I'm really enjoying this presentation since this morning. Like to invite other members of the team who has been organizing for the 15 years in a row. What I will be discussing is basically I would try to look into the way we have done. Environmental valuation is something that we have been working on, and as you know, the SANDI, which is South Asian Network for Development and Environmental Economics, I was part of it and still am. And we have trained people to look into this environmental valuation. So, as we have done it, I started developing a sense that we need to push it further, and as an academic group, we should think through. So, my presentation was basically to probably arouse thinking among us to look into this, into the environmental valuation, what we have achieved so far, and what needs to be done particularly in a globalized world as it today. So, if we start in terms of human civilization, environment has been a part of our civilization. We have been using it. We have been extracting from the nature. That has been one of the primal reason for economic growth. That has civilization has stood firmly on this extraction of nature. How did we uh, conquer the nature? That is part of our objective that we have done. And while doing so, the one obvious consequences has been on the environment. But human civilization has been pushing from throughout these centuries in terms of controlling the nature. And I believe that we might say that we started by controlling light at the beginning. But as we all know, if we look into the California fire incidents, we are still trying to control it. So it's not that we have achieved everything, but we have been trying from the day one civilization controlling the nature, and fire was one of our first. In a way, I would put them into taming the nature. That is what we have been doing. We are trying to technically domesticate nature, and it did not work. We have dammed rivers, we have cleared forests, we have culled animals, we have extracted deep inside the earth, much deeper than many people can think of. And at the same time, we have been transforming energy from one to the other. That has been the strategy of economic growth, development, and economic growth. And in return, we have also polluted the environment. So that is why how the natural world has been moving at. Coming back to economics, economists have been, and if you look in the classical economics textbook, what we all know, the stands, circular flow of income. The biggest flaw of that in that particular circle flow is this removal of the bottom basket. So I redrawn it because I think that is where we have particularly classical economics textbook did not look into it. What they were looking is that they assumed, which is probably true in Western world, a household's ownership of everything. We said yes, household or government part of the global, the institutions built up around human being owns everything. Then we forgot that there's no nature is not yet 100% owned in many countries. And the result is, as long as we bring these resources into the ownership basket, it's better. We have been managing it better. But the moment resources remain outside the basket in the nature as is, that has become polluted. And the primary failure that economists have particularly looked into is that it's an ownership failure. Because of the ownership failure, the economic cycle has changed. And based on this, we have thought about valuing the nature. And I often thought about it, how do I value nature? Do I value resources or do I value waste? Something that is always a question in my mind, and I'm pretty sure it is in the mind of many other people who are listening to this. At the end of the day, my feeling is that once a resource, waste become more valuable than the others, it becomes a resource. So we are actually continuously converting waste into resource through a exercise of looking at a trade, of looking at a value. And that has been a challenge for policymakers. So We started to, when if we look into the resource for economic growth, we say this is a resource as long as it's providing net benefits to the society. And the moment it is not, it's a waste. So that is how the values we were looking at. And then the problem that come up, particularly with the environmental movement, they have been trying to conserve nature for genuine reason, and they were really had a stumbling block. The block was economic resources are more valuable, whereas environment has no value. And as a result, the more and more we were encroaching into the nature, which is very common. So in a way, if you look carefully, we are valuing nature for conservation. We are valuing nature for our survival and economic growth. That is primarily what we have been looking at. And the concept that we have seen, which we all are used to, is what is known as use value, non-use value, option value. Very common in our literature. We have lots of techniques we are using. So if we look into use value, we use the lens of current generation who are using it. And when we are using the non-use value, we look into the also the lens of current generation, but it's not for use. So in other words, we are trying to value the satisfaction that we derive using different models and methods. And when it goes to option value, we also look at the use, but not in the lens my generation, but it's a future generation's lens. And we're looking at how much value would be accrued. So when we look into this valuation exercise, and a lot of exercise, I will give you an example from South Asia we have done. We try to uh, use the nature. We want to conserve the nature. We want to create a trade-off, and that is primarily we were looking at it. And our objective was to see how much economic surplus is generated based on this. So I had, based on this, eventually in the last 10 years of work, we had done this book, which is Environmental Valuation in South Asia. I was one of the editor of this book. And we have looked into different exercise researchers in all South Asian countries have worked on, from Bangladesh, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. So all of the researchers who have been working on, and they have been working on understanding the value of nature. So the examples that we have in the books is, for example, a shrimp farm affecting the salinity of land and how it is affecting rice cultivation. So as we started valuing it, these are the exercises that we have done. We were trying to understand whether we can actually use the compensate the rice cultivators for producing shrimp, which is making rice cultivation unprofitable. Uh, we were looking at pollution, that industrial pollution that affects also shrimp farms in a Sri Lankan lagoon, for example. So industrial pollution changes the quality of fish, and that is so. The question is how much value is lost because of that. We were looking into, for example, pesticides in Nepal, and we said, okay, if there is a pesticide used in agriculture production, vegetable farming, how much value it actually lost because of human health issues. So that was we're looking at it. We were also looking at examples of pesticide in Kerala, and we were trying to find out how much it has affected the health of the agriculture workers who are using this pesticide. We looked into conservation of national parks within South Asia. Pakistan is a good example here, where we said, well, this is the value of protecting the nature, and we found out using recreational values. So, standard exercises that we do, we said, okay, this is how we can and do it. We looked into the mangroves in Odisha and India. We looked into how much protective services the mangrove has given for protecting people from the cyclone. Similarly, your work, my work has been also on the similar things. So we look into the mangroves as a protector and find out how much value it has generated. Human health is urban air pollution is another case, that if there is a pollution in urban air pollution happens, how much it is affecting human health so that we can control urban pollution. Air pollution, we have looked into air pollution in one of the studies looking at how it has impact the rental value of housing and how it has affected the the rental value so that we can see how pollution affects human choices. Someone or another researcher has looked into hedonic estimates and tried to develop the statistical value of life from workers who are taking higher risk, environmental risk, exposed to higher environmental risk, and see how much the market is providing a value to them. We have been also looking at the benefits of better water quality supply. So in this whole exercise that we have done in this particular book, we thought, and this is something for all of us to think, we thought we have done quite a lot of work. But the more I see, more I realize that these are all microeconomic tools. We are looking at a cost benefit analysis, is an analysis where we use these for location specific, very small scale projects. That is something that has been bothering me in a way, because we have using scientific beautiful methods, but somehow our approach has been very partial. So I think valuation exercise should take a leap of faith and want to move to from micro to a macro concept. Because as we look into the valuation exercise, the way I think now, that is in a globalized world, dam in one country is going to affect another region, another country. So the impact should be understood not only from the community basis, but from a country, a macro basis. And that particular exercise, I believe that as of now, is not in the mainstream of environmental valuation techniques that we are using. So my particular issue that I have been feeling strongly that on cross-border issues, on issues of externality across boundaries, we are all talking about it, but we don't have a good tool yet in order to understand the impact of one country's behavior on another country, another community. So I think in this gathering, I thought this would be something for us to think about it. And I think for those of us who are looking at valuation, my humble suggestion is to look carefully into this and see whether we can come up with some conceptual and analytical tools so that we can actually see valuation moving from micro to macro into national planning. And some of the tools are available. Green GDP has been a concept that people have used, not that people did not use it. But more green GDP is more of a sustainability within the nation. Future. So the way I look into it, we should look into the global commons and try to understand the development. And here, the biggest challenge that I see is more of a chaos, because I think the literature that we have never thought about it probably in economics is that we should have looked into the environmental side from the angle of a theory of chaos. Or in other words, the scenarios that we predict are so micro that the moment it goes to macro, the initial conditions completely changes the results, and that is going to be the biggest challenge for economics in future. So my understanding is that we should look into these tools that we use to value the nature from a macro angle, and try to see use the tools of more of a dynamics chain of not one system but multiple system interacting, and see how we see an impact of an environmental failure that might be so causing everyone. Even on the climate change is a perfect issue for that, and we should look into more from a theory, from a more of a general theories rather than looking at specific country lenses. And that's where I rest. I thought that is something that I want to request everyone that we should start thinking in that line. And I'm still seeing missing issues in valuation by nature. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Enamul Haque, for your wonderful presentation. And I fully agree. This is the area that sometimes we struggle. We have work done under the micro analysis, but the macro analysis, that is missing. Especially the green GDP, the sustainability issues are looking. Again, if you even talk about that macro, that green GDP, looking at country specific, but the global commons is missing. Maybe this is where we should move forward, and also the cross-border use and externalities across the boundaries. Some of the presentations people mentioned about this is very important now. How your relationship is evolving with your neighboring countries. So even for the valuation, that means it makes sense, from micro to macro, we should emphasize